Well, Michelle Hurn, thank you so much for joining us at Cluck. So you wrote the book, The Dietitian's Dilemma. This is such a important topic to me. So I'm so grateful that you're not only joining me, but that you wrote this book. Do you mind if we start with just a really simple question? Because I think most people actually don't know, what is the difference between a dietitian and a nutritionist?
Yeah, absolutely. So a registered dietitian is somebody who has specifically gone through, like, to become a dietitian, you have to go through and get your 4-year degree in dietetics, like from a university. And then after that, you'll go through the dietetic internship. You have to apply and get into one of the internships. They tend to be between 10 to 14 months. And then after that, you'll sit for the RD exam. And then once you do that, you have to maintain continuing education every 5 years. And a nutritionist really has no, at least to my knowledge, legal definition. I mean, there certainly are like nutrition therapy practitioners that have like a different school, but yeah, it's kind of almost more like a health coach type thing. But as we can talk about more, I would argue that a lot of nutritional therapy practitioners and health coaches might actually have a leg up on some registered dietitians.
I'm sure there's going to be people watching this that may not know your story that much. And I know your story is pretty extensive and pretty in-depth, but maybe you can just share a little bit about your journey of, because everyone that is in the health field came from somewhere, right? There's a reason why they are doing what they're doing. There's a reason why they're eating the way they're eating. And so maybe you can just share a little bit of your journey to becoming a dietitian and to how you're eating now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when I was 12 years old, I was actually diagnosed with anorexia. I was almost 5 feet tall and weighed about 57 pounds. So I was very underweight. My BMI was 11.7. I was having heart failure, kidney failure. Basically, my body was shutting down as a 12-year-old. So I was put in inpatient treatment for 2 months. I was given about a 10% chance to survive. It was not good odds. It was pretty grim. It was a pretty horrific experience. But I did, I became weight restored, meaning I was able to gain weight. But I was told, even from, as a young person, when I was 12, pretty much through my teenage years and early adolescence, that I would always struggle with anxiety, racing thoughts around food, periods of depression, and throughout my early life and even into my adulthood, that was true. I had lots of anxiety, struggle with suicidal ideation, and just had a really hard time. So it was kind of my goal to become like a high functioning person, with a history of an eating disorder. And I wanted to become a dietitian because I knew nutrition was powerful. Like I knew, I went from being very sick to weight recovered. Like I had my life back. So yeah, that was kind of my initial goal around that. I was able to become an athlete, a long distance runner. And I basically followed the nutrition guidelines. I ate a lot of carbohydrates, a lot of quote unquote healthy whole grains, tons of sugar. And I've never had any problems with, obesity. I was always very lean because I was running. And, this is definitely the Reader's Digest version, but I lost my health a few years ago in 2019. I was trying to qualify for the Olympic trials and the marathon. My fastest marathon time was 2:54, and you have to run under 2 hours and 45 minutes. So if you're not familiar, with marathon, you have to run a 6:17-mile pace for 26 miles.
It's fast.
So, yeah, it's really fast, and I had no illusions of making it to the Olympics. I just wanted the total line at the trial. So usually between 300 and 500 women from the US qualify every 4 years. And so I was training really hard and I was eating a ton of sugar and a ton of carbohydrates. And I guess I should back up a little bit. When I was in the dietetic internship, when I was becoming a dietitian, I saw things that didn't make sense. Like, for example, we'd have diabetic patients and we'd be giving them all these carbohydrates and then dosing them with insulin. And as a student, I would ask, would it make more sense to reduce carbohydrates? And I was always told, no, everybody needs carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are important. I would look on the back of tube feeding formulas. Someone's in a traumatic car accident and they have to be fed nasogastrically. The tube feeding formula is in the hospital, and it's similar today. Number one ingredients, maltodextrin, corn syrup solids, canola oil, soy protein. And I would just ask questions like, is this the best way to feed someone who's just, had a traumatic injury or maybe can't eat because of, a small bowel obstruction or something like that. So I was kind of pegged as this difficult dietetic student, but I was new. So I was learning. So it's really indoctrinated into dietitians that you have to have whole grains, really embrace that food pyramid. All foods can fit. And, I did see a lot of disconnect around that, throughout my career. We had patients come in, we'd call them frequent flyers. They'd come in with a diabetic crisis. They'd have to have amputations. I saw lots of kidney failure. I saw people, younger than I was that were obese, morbidly obese. I saw lots of strokes, kidney failure. And you're just told that it's not the nutrition guidelines that are the problem, it's the patient. The patient is just not following what we tell them to do. But my experience wasn't really true. A lot of people were really trying to eat, brown rice and chicken and all the things we're telling them to do, but they were still struggling. So yeah, fast forward to my, 2019, all of a sudden my body stopped recovering well from my runs. If anybody listening to this is athletic, normally you'll work out hard, you'll feel sore, but you recover in a day or so. I was having lingering, just stabbing, searing pain, muscle spasms, lots of nausea. I wasn't sleeping well, bad blood sugar crashes. And so I reached out to a few dietitian friends. Said, hey, I'm eating like 350 grams of carbohydrates, which is quite a few. And I'm just not doing well. So everybody told me I needed to eat more carbohydrates, more sugar, more often. And I tried that. And as you can imagine, things went from bad to worse. Yeah. And I got really sick and I thought I was never going to be able to run again. Like it became overwhelming. My whole body hurt. And that's when I ended up adopting a very low carbohydrate diet. So and that's when my life changed. And it sounds cheesy and even a little hokey if you've never experienced it. But I went from, like I said, having anxiety, having muscle pain, having all kinds of issues to completely transforming my health in a relatively short period of time. Within a month, not only was my muscle pain gone, my lifelong anxiety dissipated. I began to be able to trust my hunger. I wasn't having racing thoughts around food anymore. Like it truly felt like a miracle. And that was kind of what changed my whole perception of what humans are supposed to eat.
Yeah, it's such a hot topic, right? I mean, because of course we have that going on around the vaccines and COVID and everything, and like where it's the same discussion of like, okay, this is what the number says is science, and then people not trusting that, or people being scared of that, and or people being, yes, I completely trust the science, I completely trust my doctor, whatever they say I'm going to do. And then there's people that are having reactions, there's people that are having issues. But I feel like it's completely all connected to the concept of like, you only know what you know, right? So we're listening to doctors and they only know what they know. And you can go back in time medically and look at the history of medicine. I mean, I was just learning recently that one of the reasons why George Washington, the first president, died is because they killed him. Like his doctors killed him. They were bleeding him out because during the time that was the practice of that medicine. They believed that if they bled you out, you would heal. And
yeah,
so,
I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, I've had every person that I've interviewed, I've interviewed a lot of people. There's 25 testimonies in the book. Like, it's hard to be like, why didn't somebody tell me this earlier? Why didn't somebody grab me and shake me and say like, this could eliminate your anxiety. This could transform your health. This, people that went from massive obesity to normal weight to food freedom. And like you said, you only know what you know. You can only teach. And unfortunately, the Academy of Nutrition, which is the governing board for all dietitians, is heavily sponsored by, General Mills, PepsiCo, Frito-Lay. So that controls the dietitian education. So we get this education that's very carb focused, very all foods fit, very sugar in moderation. And you're not allowed to teach outside of that. Even now, I couldn't go in the hospital and teach low carb education. So yeah, you only know what you know. And of course, as soon as I learned and I saw not only restore my own health, but a lot of people around me, other people in this community, it's like you can no longer be silent.
So how has that shifted for you then? So you mentioned you can't be in a hospital talking like this. So how has that shifted your practice?
Yeah. So, when I first started to heal the late 2019, I, at that point, completely given up running. I decided like, maybe I could run again. That was something that was initially really exciting. And so I started to train and started to dream of being competitive. And then when you do start to heal, you get so excited. So I was talking to all my coworkers, like, this is really powerful. And I actually, dug into the research. I was shocked how many clinical trials we have on low carbohydrates and their efficacy, their sustainability. Dr. Eric Westman and I were talking, and there's more evidence for low carbohydrate diets, more randomized controlled trials than any other diet out there. And so you think like, I'm going to just bring the evidence. And surely if these, dietitians and people see the evidence, we're going to at least want to discuss it. And I was told, no, not at all. Like, it's just not our standard of practice. It's not, you can't do this. And so that was hard and that was frustrating. And, that's when I really decided I wanted to write the book, because I wanted to write on disease states that I had seen throughout my dietetics career, specifically the, diabetes, heart disease, sarcopenia, mental health disorders. It wasn't very long after that I realized, like, I'm not going to be able to change this or really help anybody from the inside. If they're not going to let me talk about this, if they're just going to tell me to keep telling people the same advice that I've seen over and over and over again not work. And I have, we have tons of data that says that diabetes is increasing exponentially. Lots of mental disorders, including like deaths of despair, increasing. Like, the evidence is not good. Like, what we're doing right now is not working. Yeah. And so, I was kind of helped by whoever you want to believe, whether it's the universe, God, whatever. During COVID, I lost most of my dietitian hours. So I was actually put into the employee call center. And so, so I would take calls all day for patients who were ordering food. So I wasn't allowed to actually give any nutrition advice. So I had to take calls from diabetics ordering cake and chips, and I wasn't allowed to give any advice. But patients would ask me like, oh, what's good here? And I would say like, oh, you should fast. And, so I was pretty quickly told like, okay, you can't say that, but it was really interesting to me that most dietitians seemed fine. They seemed okay, just kind of doing what the status quo. We would give diabetics 90 grams of carbs per meal. Heart healthy patients I had one guy order, 142 grams of carbs per meal, but wasn't allowed to have beef or butter. It's just nuts. The advice is terrible. So every moment I wasn't in the call center, I was writing and I was looking for a way out. Man, just give me an opportunity. The second I get a chance to do something else, I'm going to. And that's when I live right outside of Portland, Oregon. There's a place called Scratch Meats where we kind of break down animals, source from local farms and make sausages. And I was like, hey, hire me, I'll take it's quite the pay cut from, a registered dietitian. But, I left the hospital, I took a leap and said, I'm just going to work with meat and I'm going to write a book and I'm just going to share my story. And I've been so fortunate to really be embraced by the low carb community. I've had some really good feedback from, a lot of different doctors. It's been such a privilege to be on with, like Ken Berry and some of the other big names in the community. So yeah, I've been kind of, putting my story out there and just living authentically and trying to spread the word, because, a low carb animal-based diet really changed my life. And I see a lot of potential, and not just with physical, that obviously we know it can help with diabetes and heart disease and, diseases of obesity. But my big advocacy is more for even the mental health aspect, and for people struggling with addictions and eating disorders and, any type of mental disorder.
Yeah, it's interesting because you talk about that. I love that you make the point of like that you felt like your anxiety went away when you started. I think you initially started with the carnivore diet, right?
I did, yes.
Yeah. Are you still eating carnivore?
No. So I'm an ultra runner. So, I do my base. The base of my nutrition, and I believe will always be animal based. That 30 days where I just ate meat, fat, and butter changed my life. And when my anxiety disappeared, I had to know why. Like, never in my dietetics education was I taught about anti-nutrients. I had no idea that plants, specifically, all the carbohydrates I was taking in, all the oats and seeds and beans had things like phytic acid, they combined with iron, and those were really crowding out a lot of the proteins and the things that I needed for my brain to function correctly. So, I think, in my opinion, for most people, an animal-based diet is the way to go. That's the basis of my diet. Most of my diet is beef and butter, and liver and sardines, but I do use some carbohydrates for my training. Specifically, I live in the Pacific Northwest, so right now we've got cherries, blueberries, some carrots. My wife makes long fermented sourdough bread. But yeah, compared to what I used to eat, which was just like massive amounts, of oatmeals and stuff. So yeah, my diet looks very different. You go from like oatmeal and bagels to like ground beef and butter, and the carbohydrates make up such a small part of my overall diet.
But I love how you connected it to your mental health, because a lot of people I find don't make that connection. I mean, most people don't even connect food to their body.
Yeah.
But then it's an even bigger leap to go, oh, my mental state is actually also connected to what I eat. For some reason, a lot of people don't even connect that to their body. And like, because I think about that a lot, like people that are diagnosed with, mental disorders and stuff like that. It's like, is anyone looking at their diet? Anyone?
No.
In most
Well,
cases, they're not.
yes, some people are. Dr. Chris Palmer, psychiatrist Chris Palmer, is incredible, and he's written some amazing clinical papers. I highly encourage anyone to check those out. He's working on putting together a clinical study for the ketogenic diet and mental disorders, including major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. So we have people, obviously getting funding for that is a challenge, but we do have people that are trying. Well, when I've worked in 2 different psychiatric facilities, and we talked about it in the book, we're feeding people between like 38 and 42 teaspoons of sugar a day. That's the equivalent of 4 cans of Coca-Cola, and that's just like in meals. And if anybody's worked in psychiatric units, they know that often there's graham crackers and all kinds of other stuff on the units. And so we're feeding these people so much sugar and so much carbohydrates. And what people aren't talking about enough is it's very possible to have insulin resistance in the brain, even if you don't have insulin resistance in the body. And, what does that mean? Like, I don't get it. I don't understand that. You can think about it like epilepsy. Children that are born with epilepsy, if they take in carbohydrates, they have a seizure. Babies have seizures. Toddlers have seizures. It's not their diet. They just have a metabolic abnormality in the brain. Well, what happens? We put these babies and toddlers on these very high fat diets, low carb, they stop having seizures. A theory is people with major mental disorders are not able to utilize and metabolize glucose in the brain. So what happens? We take them off these, off sugar, off carbohydrates. We give you protein and fat. Your brain starts functioning again. There's a fantastic case study that was just published by Dr. Sethi Shabani. 3 individuals with lifetime binge eating disorder, lifetime, all morbidly obese, all struggling 20 plus years, ketogenic diet for 1 year, remission of symptoms. Like, I think, like you said, it matters what we're putting in our body. And, obviously the theory of insulin resistance is one, but also when you start eating all these nutrient dense foods, you get the iron, you get the folate, you get, all the B vitamins, you get all the trace minerals that we've just made it okay to get out of our diet. Like, oh, we'll just have cereal and we'll have a bagel, like all these things that are just processed nonsense that have no actual nutrition the human body can use. So yeah, we've really done a disservice to many individuals, in the entire health realm, whether it's physical or mental, thinking that, you can open up a Pop-Tart, eat that and be just fine, or that doesn't impact your mental health.
How do you navigate the whole, like, I mean, because in a certain way, you're awakening to your own health through diet, and these changes also pushed you out of your career to a degree, right? So
Yeah.
how do you navigate the world of like your kind of philosophy or your kind of faith in even what you're doing now versus, I mean, I know, okay, let's put it this way, what you're doing now is connected to your experience, but I'm just saying, like, you're talking about other science around even what your philosophy now, but those people that are following, the standard American diet, they would argue that there's a science with that as well.
Oh, absolutely. And and there is to some degree. Like, you can pull up any paper that says eating fruits and vegetables and fiber lowers LDL, and I think the best thing about any individual is, like, I'm always willing to have discussion. I'm willing to be wrong, and I'm willing to share my experience. But unfortunately, what I've come to discover, and what I've even known since I was a younger dietitian, remember at the beginning of this conversation, I was like, that doesn't make sense, is, the dietetics industry is heavily funded by processed foods. And if your LDL cholesterol is really high and you eat a bunch of fiber, it'll lower your LDL. Does lower LDL lead to extended health? I don't believe so, not in most cases. And I cite that in my chapter on heart disease. We know statistically, if you have normal blood sugar, higher LDL can actually be beneficial, as it can actually act as something that binds the viruses, bacteria, and pathogens. So I'm actually, how am I able to kind of reconcile that? I like to think I'm relatively intelligent, and I had those questions. So I took the time to really study and really be able to go back and say, okay, well, I hear you say this. Can you explain this to me? Like, let's say a dietitian says, well, Michelle, you need all these healthy whole grains. I could say, okay, well, if I can get all this nutrition from animal-based, I could get everything you could possibly get from an animal and it will stabilize my blood sugar. I ask questions. Would that make more sense? We have a nation that, like I said, 70% of people are overweight or obese. 88% have some type of metabolic abnormality. Things are getting worse. So I think it's our responsibility to go back and say, like, this isn't working. Is this data outdated? Is this data funded potentially by, conflicts of interest? So really going back and looking at, where are we at and where can we move forward? Well, some people are so scared to evolve and scared to admit they're wrong, and scared to admit we need to change. So, I can only share from my experience what I know and what I've studied, but, I couldn't be silent, and I just saw so much sickness and death, that I had to speak up.
Yeah, well, and kudos for you to doing that. It's tough because it makes me, it kind of scares me when people like yourself are getting pushed out, in a sense that, and I sometimes wonder, it's like, well, where is the place for this philosophy? Like, because sometimes the beast, the industry feels so big, and there is so much complacency of like people just kind of following along. So it sometimes just feels a little hopeless, and helpless. So
I agree. And I don't blame anybody. I've had several people reach out to me and are like, what do I do? I am a single mom and I cannot leave. If I stand up to this, I know it's wrong, but if I stand up, I will lose my job.
right.
And I have no answer for you. You need to do what makes sense for you and what's best for you. I was fortunate to get to a position where financially I was able to do that. And I do think, when you follow your passion and you're true to yourself and you just time on task, I had to stay in that stupid call center for much longer than I wanted to, but every single moment I'm going to find another job. I'm going to write. I'm going to find another job. I'm going to write. And you put it out there and you put your passion out there and you're going to attract people to you. I've been so fortunate to really gather a great community. And I think that's the only way we're going to make sustainable change, because things are not going to start at the top. We are not going to see changes in the nutrition guidelines. We're not going to see changes in the hospital. There's so much money. I feel like people know that, like, oh yeah, no, you don't know that. I mean, think about how much money you think there is and multiply it by like 1 billion. It's so profoundly corrupt. And I'm not saying every nurse, every doctor, every person I've ever met, like, genuinely wants to do it and make a difference, but you're overwhelmed with the number of patients you have. To get insurance reimbursement, you have to chart. And you cannot question the status quo or they'll just kick you out. There's people behind you that want your job. So, it's hard and it's challenging, but I was very blessed that I was able to leave and was able to advocate something that I believe really works. And like I said, I've been really grateful that I've been, embraced by other people and that people are reading the book, and hopefully at some point, hopefully before I die, maybe we'll get more, more health systems, maybe not the major healthcare systems, but maybe there'll be clinics that pop up. I'm so encouraged by Chris Palmer and Dr. Tony Hampton and Dr. Robert Cywus and Ken Berry, just people that are speaking out and that are making some waves.
That's so great. I want to bring up something because I thought you touched on something that I more and more think about, and I want to talk about. So you mentioned moderation with processed carbohydrates is not possible on a psychological basis. And that idea of just moderation in general, because when I think of my own process around diet, like, I really am the type of person, like, if I just say don't eat sugar, I'm better off doing that than if I say, well, I'll eat a little bit sugar sometimes. It's like, no, the moderation does not work for me. And so I'm kind of more of like, I do better with, let's just say, a no or a yes, around certain foods. Can you talk a little bit about, like, because if you're coming from a, food, eating disorder, for someone who had an eating disorder, sometimes saying the very strong yes or no's is like, that actually feels hard, right? I mean, because it's kind of, you're almost ingrained to think like it has to be moderation.
Yes.
So, but it sounds like you're not going in that direction.
No, and I mean, I will always disclaim this with that, and I say in my eating disorder chapter that there's nothing more important than saving your life. If you are incredibly underweight, I mean, there are people that, like, when I was, 57 pounds, I needed to be hospitalized. I actually was very fortunate to sit in on a lecture for people with it was a discussion that they were supposedly talking about advances in eating disorder treatment. But yeah, often if you're super underweight and you need to be hospitalized and tube fed, there's a difference between, I think, nutrition potentially to like get your life back. But when it comes to actual moderation, what we know is it doesn't work. It doesn't work for most people on two different levels, you know, on the physiological, like your body, and then the psychological on your brain. And, you know, once again, these are things we're just not taught. You know, I was floored that, you know, when you have a lot of these processed foods, these sugars, these seed oils, these really processed flours, they can actually suppress neuroplasticity. They can stop your brain from being able to cope with stress. You know, your brain, that's one of the most beautiful concepts, in my opinion, is the brain can change. It can mold. Like if you're depressed and anxious, struggling with addiction or eating disorder, it can mold and change and rewire. And yeah, so it's like somebody who's going through treatment or who's trying to get new behavior patterns or learn new coping skills. But if you're constantly flooding your brain, you know, with all of this, this sugar and this flour, well, let me break it down a little bit better. When you eat a lot of sugar and flour, and now unfortunately, so much of our diet is, you know, breads, bagels, granola bars, cereals, cookies, crackers. What happens is it actually shifts some of the neurotransmitters in your brain. A really important one, specifically the neurotransmitter glutamate. When that goes up really high, that actually can suppress brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is keeps your brain from engaging neuroplasticity. So we're constantly doing that. We're constantly, you know, you're trying to change and your brain can't rewire. Your brain can't mold and change. So let's say you're trying to do all this recovery work for someone in like an eating disorder recovery, but your brain can't actually take in that new information. So I feel like we're setting ourselves up. You know, I cite in the book a really interesting study on addiction, cocaine addiction. And what they found that was when the brain was flooded with glutamate, people were relapsing. And of course, you know, the article was like, oh, we need to make a drug that stops the flood of glutamate. We can actually naturally stop this just by, you know, not easy tigering on all the processed food and processed nonsense. So yeah, so it's not popular in the eating disorder community to say like, you know, all foods don't fit, or, you know, and I've had people ask me that, like, oh, don't you feel like you're prescribing a restrictive diet? But let me tell you what's restrictive. I've been to hell and back having struggled with an eating disorder. I was told you're going to have racing thoughts, anxiety your entire life. I've done self-injury. I've struggled with suicidal ideation. The most unrestricted thing that's ever happened in my life has been what's been my life the last couple of years. Once you are free, you don't obsess about food all the time. You don't worry about it. You don't have, that's freedom to me. Yeah. And if that means I'm not going to eat Cheerios for breakfast and a donut as a snack, and instead I'm going to have steak and butter and, you know, some vegetables, hallelujah, praise the Lord. Like I am free. And I would tell you, like, if you had told me that 2 years ago that, hey, we're going to saw off your right arm and you'll be free, I would have been like, taking, you know, and most eating disorder people, it's a horrible place to be. It's a horrible, shame-filled, you know, there's a reason why eating disorders, specifically anorexia, have the highest mortality rate of any psychiatric disorder. It occupied every minute of my thoughts. You know, I was constantly worried, thinking about what I'm eating. So is it restrictive to remove things like Oreos and bagels and whatever? In my opinion, I think we're asking the wrong question. I think we should be asking if these things are consistently altering the neurotransmitters in my brain and causing inflammation throughout my body, maybe these things aren't food. Maybe we need a new definition of food.
That's so good. I've been trying to kind of influence and think about how to change just our relationship to sugar, for example, you know, like how we use it as a reward, right? And actually, like, what if we actually thought of it like for what it is, like a drug? Would you be giving your kids that, you know? And it's something I'm still struggling with, like how do I change that relationship to food as a reward? But I believe it's along the lines of what you're saying. It's like that it's that drastic. Like we have to look at it from a totally different perspective and ask a different question.
Yeah, I actually think you do. And I think we have to. Unfortunately, I saw in the hospital setting a lot that we really coddle patients. I specifically had a doctor tell me, like, I'm going to assume that my patient doesn't want to give up sugar and carbs. Like that, I'm just immediately making that assumption. And I had another dietitian tell me that it was really mean to tell patients to give up sugar because that would make them sad. well, I'm not tough shit. Like, we are here to heal. We are here to help. Like, having been in the hospital, like I've seen amputations, I've seen wounds to the bone, I've seen rotting teeth, I've seen dementia, I've seen all kinds of things, you know? So it's not like I'm trying to be heartless or whatever, but you know, I've seen the consequences of how people eat over and over and over again. And it's not working. And so I think we need to just have these really honest conversations. Like, and I agree, sugar is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. You can't even go to Home Depot and buy an air filter without having, you know, a candy bar at the checkout. And
Yeah.
it's the most socially acceptable thing. You know, we'll give it to our toddlers. We'll throw, you know, granola bars to our animal. Like, it's everywhere. You know, it's at sporting events. It's you know, you celebrate. You're sad you have it. And that's the thing with moderation. Most people who say they eat sugar in moderation, what does that mean?
Yeah, it's in
Ask
everything.
people, is that once a day, twice a day, once a year, twice a month? Like, nobody knows. But that's the beauty. I mean, it's brilliant marketing. You know, I mean, that people really should get all the processed food should get a pat on the back for how well they sell stuff. Like, because it's totally, you know, it's like, yeah, just have it in moderation. And people, since you can't moderate it, you have it and then you keep it. And it's really
Yeah.
funny. It's like even mock you in their advertising, right? Like, hey, once you pop, you can't stop. Bet you can't eat just one. Gotcha.
Yeah. It's like reverse psychology. So you mentioned you eat liver. I can't help but not focus on organ meats, you know, being with Pluck. Tell me, how do you eat it and how often?
You know, I've actually started to kind of up my liver game. You know, for a while I was doing about, I'd say at least 2 times a week, sometimes most of the time 3. My wife and I get a cow share. So we get, you know, like a pretty large fourth to a half a share of cow at a time. And so we tend to they give us lots of free organ meat because nobody wants it. Nobody wants the liver. So you get a ton of the liver. And so, yeah, you know, I cook it really quickly. Like, you know, the liver is one of those things you don't want to overcook for sure. And so pretty plain, little salt, pepper, garlic, yeah, you know, usually first thing in the morning. It certainly isn't my favorite, most delicious thing that I eat, but I really value the nutrition density of it. And I think it's kind of sad, you know, in America, we certainly don't eat the whole animal. You know, most people, if they eat beef, it's ground beef. You know, they're not eating
Yeah.
the organs and the tendons and all those other things.
Do you ever get any other organs other than the liver?
We do, you know, we get heart, we have kidney. It honestly isn't my favorite. But because liver is so nutrient dense, but specifically for the iron for me, for my running, that's the one I focus the most on.
How can people get in touch with you, and how should they, how would you like people to reach out?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm most active on Instagram. You can find me at Run, Eat, Meet, Repeat. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Michelle Hurn RD. I don't argue or engage very much on Twitter. The dietitiansdilemma.net is my website. The book, The Dietitian's Dilemma, is on Amazon, the paperback and the ebook. And we just recorded the audiobook that should be available hopefully by the end of the summer. It's in the editing process right now. But yeah, I appreciate all the support. I'm happy to answer any questions. And yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you. And we'll have another conversation. Hopefully we can even dive into some of the stuff we didn't get to dive into.
Absolutely.
But I'm just grateful. I really appreciate your perspective, because it's something that I also share, and I don't find this discussions happening enough, and so I'm grateful to have it with you. So thanks for talking with me.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah. All right. Take care.